All right, so to get started on this project, I went down to my local hardware store and I picked up about roughly between 13 and 16 1x5, but they're really like 1x4.5, the common wood boards. They're the cheapest stuff you can find at Home Depot or Lowe's or any other kind of stores. Now, take your time, pick out the most straightest one because we're not really gonna put them on a joiner and a planer, so we really need them to work in our favor to be straight. So now the overall dimensions of the treasure chest with the lid closed would range about 27 inches tall, 20 inches wide, and 30 inches long. So to kind of speed up the process, I decided to mass cut all the pieces that we needed for this job. So the sides were all 28.5 inches to accommodate the extra 1.5 inches on both sides. And then the end caps were about 20 inches long as well. So now that we got all of our cuts ready, we're gonna create panel glue ups using pocket holes and wood glue. So on the long pieces, the 28.5ers, we're gonna use 4 pocket hole screws, and on the short ones, the 20-inch long ones, we're gonna use only 3. We're gonna stack them about 4 high. So 4 of the 4.5-inch wide boards are gonna get glued up together and stacked together. Now, one thing to know is some of these white wood kind of boards, some of them might have a round over edge, depending if you get the premium ones or not. And if they do have the rounded over edge, be sure to trim it off on your table saw. Now, when joining these boards together, we're not gonna use a joiner and planer, so be sure to take your time to pick out the straightest boards that are not cupped or bowed out. That way the seams are somewhat decent. Also, keep in mind that when setting these pocket hole screws, it's helpful to use some kind of clamp to bring the two joints together. That way the wood doesn't move as you're trying to set the screw. Whenever doing any of these kind of panel glue ups, I like to let the boards and panels sit for at least 12 hours just to make sure that all the wood glue takes and I'm not gonna screw anything up. Also, I don't want any of the wood glue to get on my table saw or anything like that when I trim the pieces off. Which leads me into the next step, trimming off the pieces. Once the next day you come in and the boards are dry, use your table saw sled or any kind of straight edge you have to clean up the edges to make sure they're straight all around. We all know that all the really cool treasure chests have this really unique tapered look towards the end of the compartment storage. So to accomplish this, we take the ends of the panels that we glued up and we established where we'd want the taper to start and where to end. So the number I picked with is number 13. That's 13 degrees that we're gonna taper this into. Once we establish the lines, I then took my jigsaw to make the cut. Now, if I was to redo the step again, I'd probably put the 2 panels together. That would kill 2 birds with 1 stone, and then secured it together and used perhaps a circular saw instead of a jigsaw to make sure that both cuts were nice and straight. So now that our taper is done on our end caps, we need to create a matching miter cut to make sure the sides fit the flow of that taper. So to do so, we're gonna put a 13-degree miter cut using our table saw on the top of the side panel boards and on the bottom. They're both gonna be facing the same way, so keep in mind which direction you're flipping the board over when creating the second cut. And yes, to answer your question, you will have to trim a little bit on the end caps in terms of your height after you create the miter cut using your table saw to make sure it's all the same height. It's usually no more than maybe 3/4 inch to 1 inch, which is not a deal breaker. All right, so for the actual assembly, we're gonna use brad nails and wood glue to put it all together. Keep in mind, these boards are not perfectly straight because we never actually milled them. So there's gonna be some air, a little bit bending, a little bit cupping. So to make your life a little bit easier to make sure that all the glue takes, use clamps after you get everything secured to really press everything together. So let's talk about the lid for a little bit. There's a lot of different variations of lids that you can do. The straight ones, the easy ones, the more rectangular ones, they look like a coffin, and I didn't want to make a coffin. So I wanted to give it that cool radius look, kind of like that Jake and the Neverland Pirates kind of feel. So we're gonna have a radius coming off the sides and then a kind of steeple radius on top. To make sure it's all symmetrical, I found the center of the board and then used a couple of things around the house like tape or metal pieces to kind of create that radius that I wanted and trace it out. Once it was done, I then stacked the 2 pieces together and then used the jigsaw to cut it out. All right, the end caps are done. We're gonna stay on the subject of lid and we're gonna discuss how we create this radius curvature throughout the entire lid. The 28.5-inch long pieces, we need to rip them into 2-inch wide strips to allow for the bend. Now, that 90-degree angles, they're still not enough for us to continue that curvature smoothly, so we need to cut them off a little bit. What I found that works best if we create a mitered rip cut using our table saw with a degree that's between 5 and 13 degrees. You can pick a number, but that will allow for you to actually give you enough room to continue the flow of the radius pattern throughout the entire lid. Now that we got all of our 2-inch pieces all mitered and ready to go, we're gonna install them using brad nails and wood glue, securing them from the end caps through the end grain pieces. Once they're going to be installed, we're going to make sure that every piece gets butted up as closely to the last piece as possible to conceal as much of that opening as you can. Some of it might not be exactly perfect, but we can always conceal it with wood glue or epoxy. End of the day, all these pieces are going to be sanded flush, and so a lot of what you think looks imperfect is going to be concealed as well. And the stuff that can't, keep in mind, this is a pirate treasure chest. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to have a little bit of that character as well. Speaking of sanding, after the project dries the next day, come back using 80 grit sandpaper in your sander and start blending all the angles together. This is a really fun part because the project really starts becoming really pretty at this point. There's gonna be a lot of dust flying around, so make sure you're using your respirator and all the necessary precautions just to keep yourself safe. All right, so I am ready now to give it that burned look. I have the MAP Pro gases. It burns really hot, a lot hotter than propane. The two torches that I have is the TS4000, which allows me to turn it on, lock it, but I can't adjust the flame. And I have the TS8000, which I think I'm gonna go on this project with. And the advantage with this one is you can turn it on, lock it, but then you can also control the flame. So you can go at your slow pace or a fast pace, whichever feels more comfortable. So let's get started. Now, no treasure chest is complete without all the metal details, so to accomplish this, I went down to my local hardware store and I picked out this 1.5-inch wide flattened aluminum. For an 8-foot long piece like this, I paid about 13 to 14 bucks. It's nice because aluminum bends very easily to accommodate all the curves, and you can actually cut it safely using your miter saw without damaging your blade too much. Once you made all your cuts, when it comes to installing it, I pre-drilled all the holes on it that were spaced about 2 inches wide, just for symmetry and aesthetics. And then I picked up 3/4 inch wood screws. And so I just started at the bottom and I started wrapping it around, securing each screw until the entire thing was fixed. And the cool thing about it is when it comes to trimming off the last piece, you can just use your Sawzall with a metal blade on it or something like that, and it'll cut off just fine. And for the rest of the hardware, kind of like the hinges and the lock mechanism, I went to the same hardware store and I went to the department that had all of the fence kind of hardware that you would buy, and I just installed it using the same 3/4 inch screws and basically just picked out the stuff that would match the aluminum finish that I had on the trim pieces. And finally, for the finish, now keep in mind I never sanded past 80 grit, mostly because we're going to burn it anyway, so I didn't want to spend the time and perfecting that finish. When it comes to securing the charred stuff that we burned, I just use my HVLP sprayer and a water-based polyurethane. It's a satin sheen, so it applied very easily, it secured it really well, and it looks great. Well, that is it for me this week. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you like what you saw, make sure you like, comment, and share it with your friends. And if you're brand new to the channel, welcome. We put a video out every single week, so subscribe and hit the notification bell. That way you know when these videos come out. Big thank you to Burnzomatic for sponsoring this project. Make sure you guys follow me on social media, on Instagram, Facebook, and all the platforms. I'll put a link down in the description below. Tune out this week. We'll see you guys next week. See ya. Bye.